You are listening to the Maker's Quest podcast. I'm Brian Benham.
And I'm Greg Porter. And today we're joined by a special guest, Tony Rouleau, who is of Hillview Wood and Metal. I almost said it wrong there. Hillview Wood and Metal. And Tony is a tool maker that has made one heck of a name for himself among the makers in our community. So, Tony, first off, thanks for hopping on the show. I know you're busy in the shop making all kinds of cool tools to share with people, and you've got a few prototypes going. So it's always nice when folks like you can take a little time out of their day to share some thoughts with us.
It's good being with you guys. Thanks for having me on.
I was trying to think back to, I think we've only met one time in person, and that was up in New York, maybe over in, was it over in Brooklyn or maybe just east of Brooklyn? Is that Long Island that gets east of Brooklyn?
Flushing Meadows. That's
Flushing Meadows.
That's where yeah, because I met you and Tom there.
Yeah, me and Tom, and
Yep.
it was oh shoot, what did they call that? The
It's a
not a
maker fair.
Maker Fair. I was trying
Yeah.
to say Maker
Yep.
Meetup, but Maker Fair. It was really cool. I think there was a whole bunch of us up there with Jimmy DeResta, and it seemed like Laura Comp was there, and
Yep.
Giaco was there, if I remember right.
Yes. Yep.
And April Wilkerson maybe was there too. So it was a really good group of well-known makers, and holy cow, I came out of there. So for those of you who don't know, Tony mentioned Tom. Tom is another machinist, and Tom does a ton of work for me. So Tom does all the production work on my guitar tools that I make. So he makes probably about 10,000 parts a year for me. So it's a lot. And Tom's been a machinist his whole life. So it was really great to kind of put some good minds together. And I sat on the sidelines as somebody who is a complete hack, just listening to other people talk, but really a cool conversation that week. Sorry, there was no question there. I just
Sorry.
anyway. Well, so I think probably, to be fair to the audience who may not know who you are, they've probably seen your tools in a lot of YouTube videos. They show up in a lot of Instagram posts. They show up. But can you tell us a little bit about the tools you make and how you got started making them?
I guess I'm known. It's kind of weird to say. I guess I'm known for this small. Um, excuse me. It's an infill block plane and these brass and steel double squares that I make. That's really what my bread and butter is. I've done a handful of other tools, but that's what's mostly out in the ether. Is you'll see a lot of the squares pop up, in different YouTube videos and stuff. It's kind of surreal still to this day. It was funny. I was just sorting through drawers today, and I had these little stickers made up. And back when I started my company, I put since 2015, and I thought that was just corny, and I put it on as a joke. And I'm like, well, that was at some point that's going to become something, I mean, maybe 2025 it'll be, just something interesting
Well, we're
to think
almost
about.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah. The first infill plane that I saw from you, I think was for a maker gift exchange. Is that
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Sorry, I got sidetracked. There was one of the first like maker podcasts. There's Wood Talk, and there was a couple others, but there was one called MakerCast. John Berard hosted it, and he interviewed a bunch of different people. And he had approached me like a month or two after I did mine and said he was going to do a big giveaway at the end of the summer. And he was having guys like Mark Spagnolo and Jimmy and a bunch of other guys just donating stuff, whether it was T-shirts or 3D printers. It was all kinds of stuff. And I'm like, well, I'm a nobody. I'm like, what am I going to do? So I was like, and at the time I'd been making branding irons. So for in the maker community. So that's how kind of my name was getting out. But I'd always wanted to make a plane because I'm a machinist for my day job. But at home, I was a hobby woodworker, and that's what I did to, relieve stress and just keep from going stir crazy. So I'd always wanted to make a plane. So the first couple months of summer, I just sat and I'm not a I rarely draw things out on paper. It festers in my head, and I'll just constantly pick away at it. Go, I want to change this. I want to change that. And usually, like when I make a tool, the first one, the prototype will be like 95% of what the production is. I will change a few things to make it a little easier to manufacture, or somebody will say, hey, what if you did this? I always accept constructive criticism. And a lot of times, I'll just tweak things. So I made this plane, and it just kind of took off from there. And I believe you were in the first batch. I think you were one of the first. You're
Yeah,
number 7, right? If I still
you've
remember.
got a great memory, Tony. Uh, I guess my side of the story from the customer experience is I can remember following Tony on Instagram, and I think you were even doing some videos on YouTube at the time as well, if I
Little
remember
bit.
right.
Yeah,
Just
a little bit.
small stuff, but it was like, it was a small community and some really cool folks, and there was a Facebook group that we all kind of chit-chatted in, and I saw the pictures leading up to that very first plane getting made, and it just the detail in it, and sort of that the way it was made. I can remember sending you a message, something along the lines of, Tony, if you ever make another one of these, I want to buy it. I don't care what it costs. Just tell me, and I want one of those. And it was, as a tool user, I've got all of my favorites, right? Some of them came handed down. My grandfather was a gunsmith. My uncle was also a gunsmith and a machinist. My wife's two grandfathers, one of them was a machinist for TWA, and another was a sheet metal mechanic. And I have all their old tools. And so my tools, most of them don't come from Home Depot or, online or anything like that. They have a lot of, they have something behind them. And I always feel like, the way I've always said it is, when I use my grandfather's tools, or my wife's grandfather's tools, I feel like they're in the shop with me, and it's just this really cool thing. And when I saw your tool, or saw your plane, it went through my head that this is something I feel like I need in my toolbox, because there's going to be somebody somewhere down the line that's going to get this thing, and it's going to be like they're working with me in the shop, and that's going to be mine, and they're going to know it because it's so much different. And I did. I got number 7 when you said the first batch, hey, I'm thinking about making these. And I can remember at the time, money was tight and everything else. And I'm not going to talk about your prices or anything else, but I remember what it cost. I was like, man, that's going to be hard to pay for. It's not that I didn't have the money. It, it was an extravagant expense, but it was like, no, it is worth every penny because of what it is. And I see people that have your tools that put them on a shelf and never use them. And I cry inside a little bit, because your plane is my number one plane. When I reach for a block plane, I grab yours, and it is so well tuned. It's so well put together, and it's so solid. There's just enough weight to it that it works well. And it's like, you're missing out. If you're not using this tool, take it off of your shelf and start using it, because it's awesome.
Yeah, there's a lot of plane makers that it's like 50-50, and I don't really even consider myself a good plane maker, because I always get asked about making smoothers and stuff like that, and I don't feel that I have enough knowledge intimately of higher end, uh, working with different frog angles and stuff like that to really tackle. Could I copy like a Lee Nielsen and put my own spin on it? Yes, but it just doesn't interest me. But that block plane, um, there was a lot of fussing. One thing I always fretted over was the mouth opening. That's one of those things that certain plane makers are like, you should be able to slide a piece of paper through and that's it. And then I got to thinking, I'm like, well, this is a block plane. This is made to put chamfers on edges of boards. One thing it really excels at, and I didn't discover it until after I made it, was it works really well on end grain. I don't know if
Mhm.
it's the heft of it and the weight, but it just slides through end grain really nice. And even though the mouth is little. I basically just went through like 3 or 4 block planes, kind of took an average and tightened it up just a little bit. Over the years, I brought it in just a little bit, but I've just always focused on it's a general purpose plane. But you talk about people not using it. One of my favorite pictures is Jay Bates was one of the first guys in the batch, and he was one of the guys that I always say that kind of helped push my name out there. He did like an unboxing video, and it's like it kind of vaulted me into, you know, where basically planes are sold out every year. I used to try to keep a waiting list, but it's just so long that I ended up going to a lottery system.
Yep.
So Jay was out in Oklahoma. There was a woodworking event out there. It was a real homegrown thing. But I remember I saw the plane that I made him sitting on a workbench, and the plane is like almost green with tarnish, except for these 2 spots where your hand goes, and they're just mirror. And to me, that was that showed me that plane got used and abused all weekend. And it was just, and it still looked good, but it was being used, because
Yeah.
you got like Izzy will use his, but Izzy had his engraved by Jen Bauer, who does amazing engraving, but that thing's kind of turned into more of an art piece. But he will use it. He will break it out.
Go ahead, Brian. I was just
So-
gonna put this up here for people who don't know what we're talking about.
Yeah, so that's a beautiful plane. So you talked a little bit about developing the frog mouth, but how did you develop the shape of the general shape? How did you decide the style of it?
It just kind of, I don't really have a certain style. There probably subconsciously there's a style, but it's just organically, it's more organic to me. That I just kind of played around with. I knew I wanted an infill in the front, and I think I had to. That one I'm contradicting myself, but that one I actually had to CAD draw a little bit to get the curves and everything. And people, Dan Harju, I don't know if you guys know him. He's a wonderful bed maker. Yeah. He says it has very feminine curves to it, just to put it kind of nonchalantly. But and it does. It has that vibe to it, and that I think that's what, like a lot of my other tools, I tend to. I'm not a huge gun person, but I grew up around, I'm in upstate New York, which might as well be Tennessee or Georgia. It's just very country vibe here. My house is built in a cow field. So guns were always around me, but they're not more the guns that are now with the synthetic stocks and everything. They were the blued metal. They were beautiful brass stock or walnut stocks. Sometimes they had gold and brass inlays. They were works of art. They were functioning art. And that's really what you see it a lot more in my squares, my bevels. That's the vibe that I tend to go towards.
The knurled knobs, I think they're second to none, Tony.
Thank you.
Yeah, that beautiful inlay too. I'm curious how you machined that and made the wood fit. What your process was?
Well, it's cheating. It's CNC.
Okay.
Could I do that by hand? Probably. Do you want to pay me to do it by hand? No one wants to pay me to do that by hand. That's the thing. But it's just I've got over 25 years experience in CNC machining, so that's where a lot of my processes really get refined. And with the brass, what I traditionally do is I cut the pocket for the wood, and then I have someone choose the wood. I stabilize the wood. And the only wood I can't really stabilize, so there's 2, is African blackwood and desert ironwood. They just won't take the resin. But I'll cut the inlay piece in the block, and then I'll just saw it on the bandsaw, just rough. So when I glue it in, it sits anywhere from a 1/4 inch to a 1/16 proud. And then what I can do is I have I've actually built a dedicated machine now, but I basically put a belt sander on a surface grinder. Just if you're not familiar with machining, a surface grinder is basically, think of a bench grinder that's sitting above a table that can move left and right. So what I did is I replaced the grinding wheel with a belt sanding a belt. So now I can hold the square in a vise, and I move the table left and right and bring the belt to it, and I can sand that almost to where it's flush. It's probably about less than a 64th high. Then what I do is I have a bunch of granite stones that are flat on my workbench that have different grits. And this is where a lot of my time is spent is I hand sand everything, hand fit everything. The CNC can only get you so far. It's I think that's where I try to shine over some of the other tool makers and even bigger guys is the handwork that's involved and the care.
Yeah. So just for people that are listening that may not understand stabilization, that's to prevent it from expanding and contracting a lot, so that way it stays locked into inside the brass piece.
Yeah, what it is you put I think it was originally designed for like punky woods, like spalted maple and stuff. What you do is you put it in a vacuum chamber, and it's a uh very thin resin that when the vacuum pulls in, it pulls the resin in to the wood, and then you take it out and you bake it at a low temperature. I think it's like 220 degrees or around there Fahrenheit. You cook it for a couple hours, and basically, theoretically, it turns it into a block of plastic, so it can't really move. And that's how I can, it just I've never really had issues with uh wood movement because it's such a small piece of wood. But this just really it improves the resiliency of the wood, and the fit and finish is better because of it. It's just a better product.
So when you're hand sanding the area, the transition between the wood and the metal, whenever I've done things like that, I have problems with the metal getting into the wood fibers. Is that uh, is that something that resin will help prevent, or is
It
that
does. The I have to be very careful with maple. If I do like a curly maple, you'll get that. It'll have that dirty look. A lot of times, what I'll do is I'll take the square body and I'll wrap just a little bit of painter's tape. If you saw when Greg was holding it up where the logo is, that's where the most brass is. And also, when I do custom engraving on those, I'll do people's logos. Sometimes the engraving's only 1 or 2 thou deep. So if I get aggressive, I can wipe that or change it. So it's not as complicated as it sounds. It's just developing a feel for it. But what I'll do is I'll have to keep that sandpaper very clean. And then what I'll do is every so often I'll wipe that area down with mineral spirits to keep that grip from moving from the brass powder and grit from moving into the wood. But
got
it
it?
is controllable. And I think you're right. I think the stabilization helps because it doesn't there's really no pores anymore because it's filled with the resin. So I mean, obviously maple isn't a porous wood, but still they are there.
Yeah, and being a light colored wood, it probably shows
Yeah.
up more.
Yep.
So I want to move a little bit away from, let's call it technique and design, and talk about your shop a little bit and how that grew over time. And I think I know a little bit of your backstory in terms of how you got started making. Let's just talk about the first batch of block planes that you made. Did you do that? Your shop is in your basement, if I
Hmm.
remember correctly,
Yep.
and you're using some Tormach machines, and then I think you've got some older. Uh, is it a Bridgeport style mill, or do you have?
Yep. Um, right now I have a Tormach 770 Series 3 CNC milling machine. It's like the middle series of their offering. I just got it's about a year and a half old. I got the Tormach CNC lathe, the Slant Pro. I bought a Jet. I have a Jet knee mill, which is just a Bridgeport knockoff, and then I have my pride and joy is a Sharp tool room lathe, which is it's basically a copy of a Hardinge tool room lathe, which they're these tiny tanks. Like the lathe is only, I think it has an 8-inch swing, and it's like 19 inches between centers, and it weighs more than the Bridgeport. It's just this, instead of having two rails like a traditional lathe runs on, it's about an 8-inch wide solid dovetail that's ground. And it's overkill for what I do, but they are so smooth, and they're just precision machines. And I was lucky. I have the place where I worked, where I'll talk about why I started the planes. My supervisor actually saw it in an auction, or a machine dealer was selling it, and I got it for like these lathes sell new. I don't know what they'd sell for now, but 4 years ago they sold for 36 grand new. And it's just it's it's not a big lathe, but I got it for a little more than a quarter of the price. And the problem is unless you have a really good reason to use it, what I think is a shop bought it, nobody used it, they're like, just get rid of it. That's how I inherited it. But when I started with the block planes, I had been working for a couple years at where I work now. It's been over 10 years at it's a small job shop called Hayden Packard Machinery. We do a lot of paper industry. That's pretty big in this area. Tiny bit of aerospace, a lot of medical, and anything that walks through the door. Well, one of the things that the owner does is he allows us to do what a lot of machinists call government jobs, which are just after hours work. And which that's really rare, because the machines that I run, and most any machinists run nowadays, are anywhere from 50,000 to 500,000 and more. Like the 5-axis CNC that I run daily, that's like 250, 300,000. But he would allow us to use them because his thoughts were, the more we use them, the better we're going to be. And that's really where I started doing the majority of the machining was after hours. And what that allowed me to do was, the first thing I had a small jet drill, like the drill mill, which they're okay, they're fine for what they are, but they're not a real, I don't want to say it's not a real machine, but it's not an industrial machine. And then I had a jet 13 by 40 metal lathe, which is a good lathe. It's just that this one was sexier, so I had to go with it. So
Yeah.
It's like having the Corolla or having the Porsche 911. There's the Corolla does just fine, but so what that allowed me to do is I was able to buy the jet mill. I got that in. Then I went to try to finance the Tormach, which that was a whole thing in and of itself. But I got that, and then I got the lathe, and that's the one thing that this whole tool thing has done. It's allowed me to just build basically 100%. This year will be the first year that all tools that I've made will be made here in my shop. And because there used to be a time where I would utilize the machines on like a weekend, like the rear bed of the block plane. There's a lot of different things going on there, where I had a program where the 5-axis would cut the angle, it would drill the hole in the back, it would do this, it would do that. And I'm trying to weed myself off, because there is hope that someday this is like I want to be Tom.
Yeah.
I just want to do my own thing eventually. So this year is going to be the year that I'm hopefully do 100% in my shop in the basement. And it's a walkout basement. So there was, you hear all these stories about guys cutting holes in their floors to lower Bridgeports and all that stuff. No, I have a nice walkout basement.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'm sure it's still a pain in the neck to
Oh
pull a
yeah,
pull a 770 around the corner and into the
yeah.
basement.
The when I got the Bridgeport, I was really intelligent, and I ordered it at the end of January, and it was just we get good winters up where I am. I'm about an hour north of Albany, New York, right on the edge of the Adirondacks, and it's just cold. The wind was awful, and I have a bucket tractor, and the bucket tractor theoretically could pick it, but the bucket was up so high that I lost the mechanical advantage of the hydraulics, so it would just sit there. And I've got like four guys standing around with their hands in their pockets, and you notice guys are disappearing, and they're all congregated in my shop just trying to stay warm. And we ended it ended up, I swallowed my pride, took it apart in pieces, brought it in. But so I vowed every machine after that, it's at least got to be 50 degrees.
Yeah. No, I think that's super smart and dry, right? Keep
Yes.
the keep the tractor moving instead of sliding.
Yep.
Well, I guess my point for asking that question, and I think a lot of us go through this as we're building something. You start off with these big ideas and you have big dreams about what you want to do, and sometimes the reality is there's unless you're born a millionaire, there's no way to get into doing what you want to do other than asking people for favors or finding another way to get it done on somebody else's with someone else's resources. That doesn't mean you have to be a freeloader all the time, but it means that you can't always expect to, you see so many comments on people's YouTube videos. Oh, that'd be great if I had, $400,000 worth of equipment in my basement. It's like, well, most of us didn't start out that way, but
Yeah.
we started to build with a small thing, and then we replicated it, and then eventually like you said, you're going to build your next batch 100% there at Casa de Rouleau. and and I expect that from a cash flow perspective, when you're no longer having to buy 30 and $40,000 machines every year, then it starts to become something that's sustainable that you can do and support a family on and do all the things that you need to do to pay bills.
Yeah, and that's the thought right now too, is the majority of my revenue goes back into the business because I do have a full-time job. There's times I get grumpy about that, but I've stuck to my guns, and that's the plan. Uh Certain machines, I don't know if the longevity will be there, but I think, in the long run, if that's the plan, is to try to at least with the manual machines, they'll be my, as long as I take care of them, they'll be my forever tool. I'll have those for, you know and because I always tell my wife Mackenzie, I'm like, you're gonna have, when I'm gone, you're gonna have one hell of a garage sale. I'm like, I'm leaving. I'm just thinking about all the pain in the butts just to get this stuff in here. I was like, well, it's somebody else's problem. So, but
Yeah.
that's the other thing too, is there's equity here, and that's another thing. And I have stepchildren. I don't know if they sometimes they show interest and stuff, but I don't want to be. I tell people I don't want to be the little league dad of machining. Like, you got to go down
Yeah.
and cut a interference fit for a bearing, or scream at the kid while they're trying to bore a hole or something. So
Yeah. My kids only show interest when they need something made for themselves.
well, that at least it's something, and that's how. I mean, I when I did woodworking, I did a lot of scroll saw work, but it wasn't until like I was building this house. I need a coffee table. Well, I want to make a coffee table, so I bought pre-made legs from Lowe's, but then the whole rest of it I made. And that I think that's what really fuels people to get into hobbies like that. And that's sometimes necessity is does that.
Well, and I've seen you, so I'm gonna guess that you know John Grimsmo, the
I know
knife maker.
we don't. I've never spoken to him, but I know that man has done very well for himself.
Well, and I guess what I look at in John's world, and I don't know that I've ever idolized anyone for any reason, but I admire when somebody takes things to the next level, and I feel like that's his entire business is this next level knife
Yeah.
making, and he does it very well. But he decided, and he started off in his garage with a Grizzly conversion, if I remember
Yep.
correctly,
Yeah. Yep.
and made his own CNC machine out of something that was just a mill, and then added a Tormach, and then went from Tormach, and now he's into Kern at $1 million
Oh my
a
God,
pop.
I
I think
know.
he just got his second one, and I'm like a little schoolgirl looking at
Oh,
these things
sure.
going,
I know.
just,
It's impressive.
just
But again, I saw an Instagram story. I think it was this morning or whatever. It was 12:30 at night, and he's playing with his new CMM, his measuring machine, and it's like, if you're gonna do that, that's what you got to do, And he's
yeah. Well, and I guess what my point is, not to sit and drool about John Grimsmo's tools, although I do look and I think, gosh, just for that one kern, he probably spent as much on tooling as I did on my house,
yeah. Oh
which is
yeah. It's
just
amazing. All the pallets and everything that he has for it, and it's a lot, and that's what a lot of people that get into machining, even just people that buy a little lathe. I've had a handful of guys message me, and that's the one thing, as you guys probably already can tell, I like to ramble. But if people open that door and say, "Hey," they're all nervous, they want to talk to me about machining, you won't get me to shut up, because I like, and especially I like helping new people get into the craft. But that's the first thing is they're like, "I'm going to buy a milling machine, I'm going to buy a lathe," and I'm like, "Well, you're going to spend what you've spent again, and you even on cheap stuff, there's just that's the one thing I always warn people is the point of entry in machining. It's a hit, but if you commit to it, it's more worthwhile than just going like super cheese. You know,
right.
oh, I have and that's one thing I'll tell people. I have Lee Nielsen hand planes and I have Harbor Freight tools, and they all get used. It's just, you know, the Lee Nielsen hand plane would be used every day, and the Harbor Freight gets brought out once every 3 months, and it
Yep.
serves its purpose. But you have to know where and when to spend money, especially in
Prioritize.
machining, because you'll get bit hard.
Yeah, prioritizing your use cases, what you're going to use the most, and what you need your accuracy at.
Exactly.
Well, so and I'll go back to this again. The reason I brought up John, I find he gets to a spot where he might want to make a fastener that does a certain thing or looks a certain way, and he doesn't not anything you could ever buy off the shelf. And so it's a matter of, okay, now what machine do I need to buy to make this? And I can remember when he bought his first Swiss screw machine, and I'm going to say his knives probably have half a dozen to a dozen fasteners, and they're all, could fit 10 of them on the end of your pinky. They're super
Hmm.
small. He bought this enormous machine to make
That
these
Swiss machine,
fasteners,
yeah. But
and it was like, that's the only machine that will do this. You have to have this, and that's what makes his knives so good. But your
mhm.
tools, very similarly, you make all the
Well,
fasteners
and
that go into your screw.
that's kind of funny. Is I've had this idea in my head, and it required small fasteners, and you start looking, and you and it's way outside of my realm of even thinking about purchasing, but you understand why he did what he did, because you either find the screw and the screw's $9 a screw, and you're like, well, I have 10 screws in this one tool, so now that's $90, and you're like, and that just adds to the cost. But I mean, he's doing it truly for quality, and he can
Mhm.
really use some exotic materials. But I understand exactly where he went with that, because there's times where you're limited by your suppliers, and
Yeah,
he
and I've
just
seen
basically eliminates that.
I've seen and correct me if I'm wrong. I wanna say in your bevel, I wanted to add another word there, but your bevel, did you take a stock screw and modify it for the clamping mechanism in here?
Yes, and the reason why.
So there
is
we go.
a lot of like the perfect example is the bolt in a double square. Uh, if you drop any one of the brand name double squares just right, it'll snap the bolt because the bolts are cast.
Mm,
That was one of the things is I thought about just buying the bolts off the shelf from whoever, I do a lot of I use PEC exclusively now for my blades, but uh Mark Spagnola actually reached out because he had a Lee Valley which had broken a couple times, and they were great with the customer service, sent him a new screw. But the one thing that I prided myself on is it's a modified bolt because those bolts are, I want to say a cap screw is like a grade 12, or it's higher than a grade 8, and
right.
it sucks the machine. It's very hard on tooling, but as far as I know, I've made over 600 squares. I've never had a guy break a screw. And I know that some of them have been dropped pretty hard too. So that's one of those things that, yeah, I try to use that. Now, and the other thing too that limited me is, again, it's one of those things with the manual. Can I do it? Yes. But I don't want to spend all my time cutting screws on a manual machine. And now that I have the CNC lathe, I can do that. And it's all, I was talking to my cousin, who was also my accountant, a small business,
That helps.
and I was saying to her, we were just talking about woes in life, and I was like, it's time. And that's what this whole journey has really, there's only so much time. And that's what I really have to do is I have to, it's not necessarily cutting corners because I refuse to do that. It's just realizing what how much I can utilize my time. And the CNC lathe is just one of those things. The knobs, I used to make the knobs for the squares for a batch of about 75 squares. It'd be 2 weeks of nights. And I would just do this operation and do this operation, do it 70 times. Boom, 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 boom. With the CNC lathe, I can knock out 120 knobs in like a Saturday. And they're better quality just because they're
Wow.
so refined. And it's just one of those things. It's like I know people get cranky about CNCs, but they have their place, you know.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's a perfect example, and it's return on investment, and it makes me feel good that I spent the money on the lathe. But it's just it's the time. I'm losing myself, but it's the time. I just feel that, like, I tell myself I need another CNC mill. I don't have any room to put one, but if I had a second one, I could have a second spindle running. And it's because I tried. That's why I did the protractors, because I had a ton of time that was going to be dedicated to the surface grinder and the Bridgeport. There's a lot of things I do on the squares that it's a waste of time to do in the CNC, like drill the end hole in the square body. It's quicker for me just to swap them out and do the handle than push the button and wait for it to wrap it down and then peck the hole. And it's so for 4 hours a night, I would just let the CNC run, and I got 3 of those little protractor bodies. And I'm trying to pick away at them as I go through my backlog, and then eventually I'll come out and I'll have 10 finished protractors. And I'm also refining my processes while I do that.
Well, I share a similar desire. I've got the CNC Avid CNC router in my shop. I've got the Tormach in my shop, and I've got a laser cutter. And my rule is, if I'm doing handwork in the shop, I want one of those robots working the entire time I'm in there.
Yep.
And it's an interesting. Um, I started doing this when I was out at the Autodesk Build Space in Boston, and essentially they had work time. I'm going to say it was from, call it 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. That was the only time you could get on their machines and go, because you had to be supervised and all this stuff. and they had every machine known to man out there. It's amazing. And so I got in this routine of every night I would work all night long putting together the G code and all the programming and everything else, the design side of things. And then I would get in during the day. And the second they opened those doors, I was on the spindle making it go or doing whatever. And that allowed me to get it was just an interesting way. Uh, the contrast to that was there were tons of teams working alongside of me on completely different projects, some really fascinating stuff, and they would get in the morning and start, tapping away on
Yeah.
Fusion or I can't remember what some of the programs were, but they had the big, huge 5-axis machines and they had the KUKA arms and all that kind of stuff. And these guys would get in and start programming that stuff. I'm like, you should have been doing that last night. You're just
Well,
wasting
and
time.
that's what I did. I would sit on the couch and watch TV with my wife, and I would have the laptop on my lap, and I would just be building the fixture and figuring out, because like you said, as soon as I get home at about 4 p.m., that thumb drive goes into the machine, and I'm trying to set it up. But as soon as I see the spindle go and it doesn't drive itself into the vise, I beat feet over to the Bridgeport and I start drilling holes. And we've all been there. At least people with CNCs have been there. So
Yeah, yeah. There's not a single CNC operator, owner, fill in the blank that
yeah,
hasn't that hasn't watched a tool go down just
yeah.
miserably slow and go, well, that doesn't look like it's going to stop before it breaks. Oh gosh. Um, well, I know I've been asking a ton of questions. Brian, is there anything on your mind? I don't want to just own this conversation here.
Yeah, well, just to go back a little bit to where you're talking about your resources and whatnot, I've always felt like that time and money has been a limiting factor to pretty much any maker out there of their ability to make anything. Like you always just come up against this roadblock of either, oh, that's going to take way too long to do, or it's just going to cost more money than I have to get the machining or material to get it done. Is there anything that you have in your mind that you really want to build, but you haven't been able to pull the resources together, either time and materials?
uh, I do. Like I said, I would love to take the time to make a proper, like I don't a proper infill plane. Like I don't know if you guys know like Ron Brees or Conrad Sauer, or these are like the real high end plane makers. Their planes command thousands of dollars. My plane commands hundreds of dollars. Theirs commands thousands of dollars. They're just really. I would love to have the time to just, for lack of a better term, fart around and figure out, you know, okay, the mouth is too tight, or if I change the angle of the frog, it's better in figured woods, and that's what I would love to do. Um, the machinist nerd in me too would love. I'd love to make a micrometer in my style.
Ooh.
That would be fun to do. Uh, I would really love to explore. I made these little pocket levels. It was just I spend a lot of time looking at like 1800s 1900s tools, and a lot of I saw a little, it was a little pocket level, and it was a cast iron, and I liked the shape of it, and it was neat. So I ended up, last year I sold I think it was around 150 200 of them. I did a big batch of them and they did well, but I want to get more into the precision levels, and I want to get like ornate, and I would like to get like a fourth axis for the Tormach, which that think of, just basically think of a lathe chuck that can turn in any position above a milling machine. For people that don't know what a fourth axis is, and that's what I'd really, those will eventually, I think, happen. It's just I have to do the squares and stuff because those keep the lights on. I enjoy making them, but those are like the bread and butter that pay for the machines and do that stuff.
So when you say developing your own style, or with the fourth axis CNC, is that going to be like an engraving type of a thing, like
Well,
a Ginny Bauer type style?
in a way, but like on a machinist level, it's basically a pedestal, and then the vial sits in a tube. I'm giving away too much, but uh, the tube, I would like to do intricate cuts in the tube that the vial sits in, and things like that. Maybe
Okay.
skeletonize that to just make it look more ridiculous and ornate.
Yeah. So of your speaking of your style, I saw you post a picture in the Wood Whisperer Guild of something that is that something you're prototyping now?
I made that. I made that in the wintertime. That was I don't think I have it here. I've always found it general, I think, was the original. It's this square protractor. It's a piece of like 3 by 2.5 just sheet metal, for lack. It's like it's not even a 16 thick, and it has 180 degrees on it, and then it has a leg that you adjust, and that's how you set your angle. That protractor. And I always liked them, but they're always cheese. And there's like the ridiculous machinist protractors that you can set to the minute or the second of the degree, but there's really no woodworking one. Well, what I did is I made one in that vein of the general, but I made it brass, and then I dovetailed a ledge on it, because that's the thing with the sheet metal is there's no bearing surface for you to register off of. And that was the thought there. And it also has a depth gauge feature, because a lot of those protractors did. So as Greg can attest, my stuff is not lightweight. And at first it really wasn't designed to be heavyweight, but every time I go to a show, when someone takes a tool, I carry this ridiculous case around that has my tools, because people would rather see the tools, than me being like, I don't have anything on me. So I'll bring a case with like a bevel and a block plane in it. Every time someone picks that up, they go, oh, they appreciate that
Yeah.
heft. So I don't, it's the protractor skeletonized, but the one thing I was asking about in the Wood Whisperer Guild is the thickness of the blade, because I didn't realize that some guys, when they set up their bevel gauge, they'll slip that bar through the bevel gauge and line up their blade. Well, my bevel gauge is the blade on it's really thick. It's almost 3/32, where most of them, like the chinois and stuff like that, are anywhere from 1/16 to just a little under. They're very thin, which they work fine for what they are, but the one thing I wanted is I wanted to see Chris Vesper makes, I feel, the best bevel in the world. Mine are good. Mine are probably comparable, but he makes 500 for my 20. So he gets that. I feel he gets that title, but I didn't know the thickness of his blade. So I wanted to make sure the people that are going to be buying this protractor are more than likely going to have either his bevel or mine, or a comparable. So I'm trying to find how thin I can go with that blade to allow that to happen, but then keep it as stout as possible. Because the blade on the general is only like 40 thousandths. It's like 3/64 of an inch. It's sheet
Yeah.
metal, and it's fine because it's a $10 protractor. But that's the other thing. If you're going to pay this money for this tool, I want it to be rugged and elegant and just, quality.
Yeah. So two things. One, your stuff is heavy, which is a good thing for me being a woodworker. I'll tell you, the planes that I have that have a lot of weight to them, cut better, just because it reduces the chatter, slides smoother. Once you get that momentum going, it just slices off. But why I brought up the post that you posted in the Wood Whisperer Guild is as I was scrolling through Facebook and I saw that post. I didn't see the name right away, but as soon as I saw the picture of the dovetails in there, I was like, huh, that looks like a Tony Rouleau style because of the hand plane dovetail. And I was wondering if that was an intentional thing that you're trying to carry through all your stuff, that machined metal dovetail.
I mean, metal dovetails are cool. No matter how,
Yeah.
whenever anybody sees metal dovetails, you just and I do want to that I do want that to be part. I actually the precision level I want to do. I want to incorporate that as well, just because dovetails are cool. But yeah, you do see. I think I use certain radiuses and everything, and like I said, I don't feel I have a style that I'm going after. I just think it's subconscious. It's how you do things, you
So
know.
it has a lot of more function to it, but you like how it looks. Is kind of how
Yes.
that came about. Got it.
Yeah, I want it to
Yeah.
be, because that's the one thing I battle a lot in my head tool wise. Is I want my tools to be elegant, but I also want them to be simple. I only want them to do maybe one or like it seems like now certain tool makers, their stuff is like Ron Popeil. There's like it just does everything. And I try to fight that gimmickiness. I don't even know if that's a proper word, but I don't like gimmicks in my tools personally. So I try to the stuff that I put into them, I want it to be I just don't want it to be wasted. I don't want to say, oh, it'll do X, Y, and Z when 99.9% of the people are only going to use X.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the tools that I have that I bought because I thought, oh, I'm going to buy this because it does everything. I won't need to do it. Well,
Oh,
it
and
only does.
I have the same stuff. I
Yeah.
have all that kind of.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
that looks cool, but
those tools only do the one thing really well and only sort of do the other things. And so then I end up buying the tools to do the other things. And so now if someone says, oh, look at all these 10 things it does, I'm just like, okay, see you later. I'm still going to go buy the individual tools just because I don't want to fall into that gimmick because it'll
yeah,
do the one thing good, but not all 10.
I want my tools to just do the thing that they're meant for really well. And a lot of people have used the term heirloom tools, and that's what I like to think of them as. Is I
Absolutely.
want, you know, I, I actually it was a little weird. I had a guy message me out of the blue on Instagram, and he was asking me questions about. He had one of my block planes, and he's like, "Oh, do you offer blades and this and that?" And I'm just like, I've only made just over 100 block planes, so I pretty much remember. I'm not. I don't. I remember Greg because of number seven. Seven's easy to remember, but this guy's name. He ended up buying the plane from an estate sale from a guy who had passed away, and I'm like, my stuff has been around long enough to turn into this. Now it's like there's this website, Jim Bodie or Jim Bode, and they sell like they'll sell everything from Bridge City to like the older Bridge City tools to tools from like the 1700s, and it's all like high dollar stuff. And I hope, I this is a little arrogant of me, but I hope someday that one of my squares or something will pop up and I'll be like, oh, look at that,
I could be charging triple.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
You need to just put out a fake story about yourself, Tony. His hands were, whatever, crippled by a blueberry pie incident, and he can't make squares anymore. But oh no, I mean, honestly, Tony, that was one of my thoughts. Like I said, when I bought the square in the first batch, number 7, I like to think, yeah, I'm a single digit. Woo, there's not many of us out there. And I think all of mine are the number 7s. And you even sent me a message when you were putting out the pocket levels, and
Yes. Yep.
and asked if I wanted number 7, and um, I and I felt terrible. I'm like, I
Oh,
don't
it's
think I would
fine.
use one. And I guess my reverence for the tools is I want to buy them and use them. And I would tell you the bevel I haven't used much, and it's only because I haven't done anything with any angles on it, and I feel like I need to do some things with good angles on them. But yeah, the pocket level, I was like, I should just get it because it's number 7. But it's like, no, I feel like there's somebody else on that list, like you said, there's a wait list for this stuff, and it's like, let somebody who's going to use it buy it, and I'm not going to take that spot in line. There may be someday where I kick myself in the pants for bypassing that, but we'll see.
You could buy it from that high-end website later on.
There you go. Yeah,
I could
maybe that'll.
buy it for
I'll send you the link.
$6,000. Well, somebody will watch this podcast and go, "Oh, I've got number 7, and I'm holding it for ransom."
Start sending you messages.
Yeah, if I get a bunch of Instagram DMs with the number 7 pocket level, I'll know where they're coming from.
I have one more question for you. That's might be kind of a controversial question. Metric, imperial, or cubits? What's your favorite?
It's all decimal to me. And I know that's kind of a cop out, but most of my machinist career, we would get prints in both, and it just not cubits, but but it just turns into decimals. I mean, obviously for me it gets turned into imperial, but it's just, for me it's not that hard to work with. I've been around it enough that I know 6 millimeters is close to quarter inch. I know that stuff. So I I believe that metric is better just because of the whole base 10 thing, but it's just ingrained in me, the whole imperial thing.
So on your day-to-day working, you're working in imperial.
Yeah, and
all
like
your
I said,
machines are set that way.
Yeah, yep. It's all decimals, like quarter inch is 0.25 and
What's
but
7/64? Do you have that one in your head?
7/64? No, I don't.
Didn't know you were gonna get a math test here, did you?
No,
No.
I only
Is it
asked
like
that.
109?
You
I
might
think
be
it's like
right.
109 something.
I just know when I asked Tom, I'm like, oh yeah, I think that's 7/64. He will kick out those decimals for everything down to the 64th. It just blows my mind. But that tells you how long he's been doing those.
But I
fractions.
have seen an uptick in people from the States that are buying metric scales for their squares. And I do offer imperial and metric combination squares, but there's a lot of guys that are just buying just metric, and I think it's Festool is what's is pushed them. Is a lot of the stuff Festool is in metric.
So it's 109.3. So nice work, Tony. Well, awesome. I guess I'll just kind of wrap up if that's all right.
Yeah. And before we hang up, is there anything you want to plug, Tony? Do you have a website you want to go to?
www.hillviewtool, HILLVI, tool.com is my website, and Hillview _WM on Instagram. And then you can just search Hillview Tool or Hillview Wood Metal on Facebook. That's Instagram is where I'm most active on.
Cool. We'll have all those links on the Maker's Quest podcast website.
Well, Tony, I want to say a huge thanks. I know we had to reschedule once before, and I apologize for that when I had to bug out and go out of town. But really appreciate you being with us tonight and talking about your journey with tool making and some of the background with your machining. It's always fascinating to talk to someone who's such a wonderful maker like yourself.
Thank you. I was looking forward to this because I figured I was going to get asked different questions, and I'm glad it was what I expected, and I'm happy about that. Thanks for having me on.
Good. Thank you for coming.
Awesome. Well, you can check out Tony Rouleau's website at hillviewtool.com. You can catch Tony on Instagram, where he's most active at Hillview _WM on Instagram. And on Facebook, you can search Hillview Wood and Metal. Did I get that right?
Yep.
Or Hillview Tool. So thanks again. And I am Greg Porter. You can catch my YouTube channel at Greg's Garage or Skyscraper Guitars.
And I'm Brian Benham, and you can find me just searching Brian Benham. Thanks for listening.